Imagine a sleek, you know, $5 trillion sports car.
Oh, the absolute top of the line.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It has the absolute best engineering on Earth. I mean, it's the envy of the entire world. It's got the prestige, the history, and a track record of just leaving everyone else in the dust.
Yeah, the kind of machine that defines the standard.
But then, you sit in the driver's seat,
Yeah.
and you turn the key, and the engine just sputters.
It just won't start.
It won't start at all. And today, well, we are looking at Germany.
We really are.
Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you. We are opening up this massive, totally data-rich dossier on the economy of Germany, and we've got every metric updated all the way through early 2026.
Which is a really fascinating time to look at it.
It is. And I want you, listening, to visualize this information.
Yeah.
Not as some dry stack of financial papers, but as a really vivid, floor-to-ceiling, totally immersive encyclopedia in your mind's eye.
I love that visual.
Right. Picture these brilliant color-coded infographics just surrounding us. So over here, you've got this gleaming silver representing their world-famous precision machinery.
But engineering backbone, yeah.
Exactly. And over there, a wash of deep, vibrant green for their massive push into renewable energy. And here's the kicker. Look down, and you see the stark, blinking red of recent economic warning lights.
The alarms are definitely flashing.
They are. And just beneath the floorboards supporting all of this is a solid golden yellow foundation representing just thousands of tons of sovereign gold reserves.
That visual framework is, it's entirely necessary to grasp the reality of Germany today.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you just look at the raw numbers on a spreadsheet, the contradictions, they just don't make sense. You really have to see the vibrant, almost clashing colors of its current situation.
Right.
We are analyzing a nation that is, well, it's a masterclass in synthesis and contradiction. It's a place where deeply entrenched, centuries-old history is suddenly slamming headfirst into a really rapid, forced evolution.
And that is the absolute core mission of our deep dive today. We need to figure out how these vastly different realities can even exist on the exact same canvas. I mean, we are talking about the undisputed heavyweight champion of Europe.
Undisputed.
This is a country that ranks third globally in nominal GDP. As of our latest 2026 data, they boast an economy of over $5 trillion.
$5 trillion. It's a staggering number.
It's massive. And yet, simultaneously, this very same titan is trapped in a multi-year recession, with the government literally cutting its 2025 growth forecast to absolute zero.
Yeah, zero growth.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does a $5 trillion economic titan end up with its engine sputtering so badly?
To answer that, we have to start by pulling up the macro dashboard of the German economy. We need to look at the overall structure before we start dismantling the individual gears, you know.
Right, look at the whole car before taking apart the engine.
Precisely. So Germany operates as a highly developed social market economy. It is the absolute anchor, the gravitational center of the European Union.
The heavyweight.
Exactly. You're looking at a population of around 83 million people. That makes it the largest single consumer market in the EU. And to put the scale into perspective, Germany alone accounts for 23.7% of the entire Eurozone economy.
Wow, almost a quarter.
Almost a quarter of the wealth generated in the Eurozone comes from this one single nation.
So, I mean, when Germany stalls, the entire continent feels the drag.
Profoundly, they feel it everywhere. And the engine driving that massive scale, the thing that pumps life into that 23.7%, is exports.
They're famous for it.
Germany is an undisputed, historic export titan. Let's look at the 2024 data. In that year alone, they exported $1.66 trillion worth of goods and services.
Brazilian. With a T.
With a T. And they recorded a trade surplus of $255 billion, which, by the way, ranks second worldwide.
That's incredible.
And we aren't talking about exporting raw, cheap materials here. We are talking about the highest value-added goods on the planet. Vehicles, industrial machinery, complex chemicals, highly sensitive electronics, advanced pharmaceuticals.
Right, they make the stuff that is really hard to make.
Exactly.
But, okay, I'm looking over at the red section of our mental encyclopedia, and the dashboard is just lighting up with these massive blinking warning signs.
The red is very bright right now.
It is. The economy contracted by 0.3% in 2023. Then, instead of bouncing back, it shrank again by 0.2% in 2024.
2 years in a row of shrinking.
Right. And then you get to the 2025 forecast, which, as we mentioned, was slashed to zero, just flat zero growth. And then we have January 1st, 2026.
Ah, yes, the chancellor's speech.
Yeah, Chancellor Friedrich Merz steps up and flat out declares that parts of the German economy are in, quote, critical condition. I mean, that is incredibly stark language for a sitting chancellor to use about his own country's industrial base, isn't it?
It is a shocking admission. I mean, usually leaders go out of their way to project confidence to the markets.
Right. Everything is fine. Stay the course.
Exactly. For the chancellor to use the phrase critical condition, it means the structural issues are just, they're too large to gloss over with optimistic rhetoric anymore.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Let's go back to my sports car analogy for a second.
Okay.
If exports make up 50.3% of their entire national output, meaning half of everything they do is successfully selling things to other countries.
Right, half the economy.
And they're the third largest economy in the world. How can they be in a multi-year recession? How do those two realities coexist? I mean, if you are the best in the world at making things people want, shouldn't your economy be booming?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the very thing that makes the engine so powerful is exactly what is causing it to stall.
Wait, really? Their strength is their weakness.
Yes. The inherent vulnerability of a heavily export-dependent model is that you are entirely, unavoidably at the mercy of global headwinds. You cannot control the weather outside your borders.
Oh, I just see.
There is an old economic adage, when the world catches a cold, an export economy gets pneumonia. And right now, the global trading system is deeply structurally sick.
I see. So it's not necessarily that the German workers forgot how to make great cars or machines. It's that the people buying them are changing their behavior.
It is a confluence of external and internal shocks hitting simultaneously in this 2026 context. First, internally, you have rising costs and falling domestic productivity, which we will dissect in detail later.
I'll get to that.
But externally, you have a radically shifting geopolitical trade landscape. Look at the United States. The U.S. is Germany's largest trading partner. Germany ran a massive 65 billion euro trade surplus with the U.S.
Meaning, just to be clear, Germany sold 65 billion euros more to the U.S. than it bought from the U.S.
Correct. And in previous decades, under a fully globalized free trade consensus, that was just seen as a sign of German manufacturing excellence. It was celebrated.
Everyone was happy.
Right. But the political climate has changed. In the mid-2020s, that massive imbalance makes Germany a prime target. Large trade surpluses are now often viewed politically as a vulnerability or even an exploitation of the trading partner.
Oh, wow. So being too successful is a liability now.
Exactly. Because of this, Germany is facing the looming threat of intense U.S. trade tariffs, specifically targeting that surplus. Economy Minister Robert Habeck explicitly cited the impact of these U.S. trade policies when the government slashed that 2025 growth forecast down to zero.
So the very fact that they are so incredibly good at exporting that they have this massive surplus actually puts a target on their back in a protectionist world.
Precisely. And if you look eastward, the situation is equally precarious. Despite knowing they need to diversify, the German economy remains dangerously reliant on China.
Another massive market.
Yes, but they rely on China not just as a massive consumer market for German cars and machinery, but crucially, as a supplier for the raw materials and intermediate products necessary to build those goods.
So they need China to build the things they sell to China.
Exactly. So Germany is caught in the middle of a massive geoeconomic tug of war. They're facing potential punitive tariffs from their biggest ally on one side and deep supply chain vulnerabilities tied to a systemic rival on the other.
Okay, that is a tight spot. And to truly understand why Germany's engine is built this way in the first place, why they decided to bet half their national output on exports and heavy manufacturing, we need to understand how the machine was assembled.
The history is crucial here.
It is. I want you, listening, to imagine our sleek digital dashboard fading out for a second. Picture a sepia-toned historical map rolling out in front of us and slowly transforming into a bright, modern economic web. How did they get here?
Well, you cannot understand the modern German economy without understanding how incredibly unique its industrialization process was. The timing and the mechanisms set the DNA for everything we see today.
The history really surprised me when reading the dossier. The sources point out that Germany actually industrialized quite late compared to its major rivals.
Very late, yes.
The United Kingdom and France had a massive head start. Germany didn't even become a unified political country until 1871.
Right, the German Empire.
But the economic seeds were planted decades before the political borders were drawn, right? With something called the Zollverein in 1834. What exactly was that, and why does it matter?
The Zollverein was the German customs union. And to understand why this was revolutionary, you really have to picture what the map of quote-unquote Germany looked like before 1834.
It wasn't one country, right?
No, it wasn't a country at all. It was a fragmented mosaic of dozens of independent kingdoms, duchies, and city-states. Imagine being a merchant trying to transport a cart of coal or maybe woven textiles down the Rhine River.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Every few miles, you would hit a different border. You would have to stop, pay a tariff, deal with different currencies, different weights and measures. It made internal trade paralyzingly expensive and slow.
So a merchant is practically bankrupt just from taxes before they even reach their destination.
Exactly. The Zollverein stripped away those internal tariff barriers among the participating German states. It created a massive, unified free trade zone internally while maintaining a common external tariff against outside nations.
A huge game changer.
It was. Suddenly, that merchant could travel hundreds of miles without paying a single internal toll. It instantly supercharged domestic commerce, and it perfectly coincided with the next massive technological leap in 1835, the railway.
The first German railway linking Nuremberg and Fürth, which sparked what historians in our sources call railway mania in the 1840s.
And this wasn't just a transport upgrade, it's an economic catalyst. Between 1845 and 1870, they laid down 8,000 kilometers of track.
That's incredibly fast for that era.
Think about the physical mechanics of building a railway network. You need iron for the tracks. You need coal to smelt the iron and run the steam engines. You need heavy machinery to build the locomotives.
So it's feeding itself.
Yes. The railways essentially forced the creation of a massive, integrated, heavy industry sector. It created markets out of thin air, demanded armies of engineers and skilled machinists, and drove massive capital investment into the Ruhr Valley, which was very rich in coal.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I was thinking about this late start. It's like you are building a house a decade later than all your neighbors.
Right.
But because you waited, you don't have to make the same architectural mistakes they did. You get to use the absolute newest blueprints.
That's a great way to look at it.
Germany goes from being 67% rural at the birth of the empire in 1871 to an absolute machine-building superpower in just a few decades. The data shows that by 1900, they had actually surpassed Britain, the nation that invented the Industrial Revolution in steel production.
That concept of the newest blueprints is spot on. Because Britain was first, they were locked into older, smaller, less efficient factory models. Germany, building fresh, built massive, highly integrated state-of-the-art industrial complexes.
They just leapfrogged them.
They did, but this raises an important point. They didn't just build factories with those new blueprints, they built a completely new social structure to support the workers inside those factories.
Okay, this is the part that absolutely blows my mind. In the 1880s, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck institutes the world's first welfare state. The first in the world.
Right.
And Bismarck was a staunch conservative, right? He wasn't some radical socialist.
Far from it. Bismarck was a Prussian aristocrat, but he was incredibly pragmatic. During the 1880s, the Industrial Revolution was creating brutal working conditions, and socialist movements were gaining massive traction among the working class.
So they were threatening to rebel.
Exactly. Bismarck recognized that a sick, impoverished, and revolutionary workforce is terrible for national stability and terrible for industrial output. So between 1881 and 1889, he preempted the socialists by introducing universal health care, compulsory education, sickness insurance, accident insurance, and retirement pensions.
It's just brilliant, cold calculation.
It was an incredibly effective economic strategy. He bound the working class to the state. And by investing so heavily in universal compulsory education, Germany achieved a 99% literacy rate.
99% in the late 19th century.
Yes. Think about the competitive advantage of that. They were producing more engineers, chemists, and highly skilled precision workers than anyone else on the continent. This wasn't just manual labor, it was highly educated labor. Because of this, by 1914, Germany was producing half of all the electrical equipment in the entire world.
So they essentially engineered the ultimate, perfectly tuned workforce.
They did.
But of course, the 20th century brings unimaginable devastation to that machine. The sources detail the intense economic shifts of the Weimar Republic and the subsequent era of the Third Reich. And just to be completely clear to you listening, we are looking purely at the cold economic mechanics detailed in the data here, entirely setting aside the politics.
Right. Focusing strictly on the economic structure.
Exactly. We see this violent trajectory from the severe unemployment and hyperinflation of the post-World War I era, swinging radically to full employment. And the mechanics of that employment were driven by massive state-funded public works, like the famous Autobahn system, and rapid, intense rearmament.
Yes, the economic policy mechanics during that specific 1930s era heavily utilized what was called the New Plan, instituted in 1934. The core economic goal of the New Plan was autarky, or extreme self-sufficiency.
They didn't want to rely on anyone else.
Exactly. The state wanted to completely isolate the German economy from global blockades or international financial markets. They did this through incredibly strict foreign exchange controls, strict import quotas, and establishing bilateral trade agreements, essentially barter systems with less developed nations,
Why barter?
to secure raw materials without using international currency. It was a complete command and control pivot of the industrial machine towards state objectives.
And then, following the total physical and economic destruction of World War II, we see another massive pivot, the absolute flattening of the country, followed by what the sources describe as the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle in West Germany.
This is perhaps the most crucial chapter in understanding their modern economic DNA. Think about the landscape in 1945.
It was just rubble.
The infrastructure is gone. The factories are rubble, millions of working-age men are dead or captive, yet West Germany rebuilt itself into an economic powerhouse in a staggeringly short time.
How is that even mathematically possible?
The mechanics of this miracle relied on a few key pillars. First, the introduction of a stable new currency, the Deutschmark, which wiped out post-war inflation and restored confidence almost overnight.
Okay, stable money. What else?
Second, an incredibly intense work ethic. The population simply worked grueling, long hours to rebuild. And third, the vital, indispensable contribution of the Gastarbeiter, or guest workers.
Where did they come from?
Primarily from Southern Europe and Turkey, they filled the massive labor shortages in the booming factories. The economy simply could not have grown at that pace without them.
Meanwhile, you have East Germany operating under a completely different Soviet-backed communist system.
A totally different universe, economically.
The data notes they had zero official unemployment, but their economy was heavily hobbled from the start because they suffered massive industrial extraction through Soviet reparations. The Soviets literally dismantled factories and shipped them east.
Exactly. You had two completely different economic experiments running side by side for decades.
Which brings us to the monumental year of 1990. The Berlin Wall falls, the country reunifies, and Germany begins this massive, unprecedented economic integration project to drag the East's economy up to the standard of the West.
A monumental undertaking.
The sources note this project involves staggering annual financial transfers of roughly $80 billion. Let's pause on that number. $80 billion every single year to rebuild the East.
And, that project is still ongoing today.
Still.
What this entire historical timeline reveals is that Germany's economic DNA is fundamentally defined by its ability to rebound from profound existential devastation.
They know how to rebuild.
But it also reveals a deeply entrenched philosophy, going all the way back to what historians call the Rye and Iron Coalition of the 19th century.
Right, the political alliance between the aristocratic Prussian agricultural landowners and the heavy industrial barons of the Ruhr.
Exactly. There has always been a precedent for deep systemic integration between state policy and heavy industry. The state and the factories work hand in glove. That philosophy of synthesis, of a socially managed but highly competitive market, is the absolute bedrock of the modern German social market economy today.
Okay, so let's zoom out from the history and look at exactly what that modern industrial machine looks like right now in the 2020s. Let's pull up a new infographic in our visual encyclopedia. I want you to picture a vivid, massive pie chart representing all German businesses.
This is where the global perception of Germany and the actual reality of its corporate structure violently diverge.
I love this part, because if I ask you to name a German company, you are instantly going to picture the behemoths, and they are absolutely massive. Out of the Fortune Global 500, 29 companies are headquartered in Germany.
Heavy hitters.
We are talking about Volkswagen, which is the single largest company in the entire European Union. You have Siemens, the world's biggest industrial machinery company. You have BASF, the world's largest chemical producer. Allianz, the world's largest insurance company, these are titans that dictate global markets.
And the German corporate landscape has a really rich history of executing massive corporate consolidation to build these titans. We shouldn't forget that the largest corporate merger and acquisition deal in global history, a record that still stands today, involved a German firm.
Wait, really? Which one?
In 1999, Vodafone acquired the German industrial and telecommunications giant Mannesmann for over $200 billion.
It's wild that a record from 1999 still holds.
It was a colossal deal.
But here's the twist. Here's the part of the pie chart that absolutely fascinated me in the dossier. If you look at those massive household names, the Volkswagens, the Siemens, they represent a tiny, practically invisible sliver of the actual corporate landscape.
Visually, they're barely aligned on the chart.
Right. Over 99% of all German companies belong to what is known as the Mittelstand.
The middle stand, yes. If you want to understand the true beating heart of the German economy, you absolutely have to understand the middle stand. These are small and medium-sized enterprises, and the crucial defining factor is that they are overwhelmingly family-owned and operated.
And when we say small and medium, we aren't talking about, a local bakery or a neighborhood craft shop.
No, not at all.
About 1,000 of these middle-stand companies are what the data calls hidden champions.
This is a phenomenal concept.
What exactly makes a company a hidden champion?
These are firms that are absolute global market leaders, but they operate in highly specialized, incredibly niche business-to-business segments. Think about the smartphone in your pocket right now, or the advanced medical scanner at your local hospital. There is a very high probability that a microscopic, highly specialized component inside that device, maybe a specific optic lens or a specialized microvalve or a unique chemical coating, is manufactured by a family-owned German company in a small town of 10,000 people. That's crazy. According to the data, these German hidden champions represent 48% of all global market leaders in their respective niche segments worldwide.
I just love the irony of that. The whole world pictures the massive Volkswagen factory stretching for miles. But the biggest slice of the pie chart, the real anchor of the economy, is a family-owned factory in a picturesque village making a highly specific optic lens that the entire global tech supply chain secretly relies on to function.
It's the hidden engine, yeah. And we have to ask why this middle stand model has been so historically brilliant. It comes down to corporate governance and time horizons.
Oh, so?
Because they are family-owned, they are not beholden to the frantic short-term pressure of the next quarter's shareholder earnings report. A publicly traded company might slash research and development just to make this quarter's profits look good.
Right, to please the stock market.
Exactly. A middle stand family firm is planning for the next generation. They prioritize long-term stability. Furthermore, they cultivate incredibly high worker loyalty. They often treat their employees as an extended family.
So they don't just fire people at the first sign of trouble.
No. If there is an economic downturn, they will absorb the losses rather than fire their highly skilled machinists, because they know that retaining that specialized knowledge in-house is their ultimate competitive advantage.
That sounds like an incredibly resilient, beautiful system.
Yeah.
And it's a massive. But if we look at the data from the first 10 months of 2024, our encyclopedia starts flashing red again.
The alarms come back.
They do. The pain is starting at the top. Over 60,000 jobs were cut across the major corporate giants. Siemens, Bosch, Volkswagen, Deutsche Bahn. Bosch alone announced plans to cut 7,000 jobs in November 2024.
That's a massive blow.
Now, if these massive, diversified, multi-billion-dollar giants are bleeding that heavily, what is happening to the middle stand? What happens to the hidden champions?
This is where the critical vulnerability of the middle stand model is exposed. Those hidden champions are hyper-specialized manufacturers, and manufacturing at its core requires energy.
Lots of it.
You cannot forge specialized steel valves or run chemical synthesis or bake optic glass without massive amounts of power. When you experience a sudden massive shock to energy prices, a middle stand company making an energy-intensive component suddenly finds its profit margins completely annihilated.
They just get wiped out.
Unlike a massive conglomerate like Siemens, they don't have vast, globally diversified portfolios or endless cash reserves to absorb a multi-year structural shock. If it costs them more in electricity to make the lens than they can sell it for, the generational business model collapses.
Which brings us perfectly to the most dramatic, colorful, and frankly alarming chart in our mental encyclopedia. The energy sector. Let's pull up the energy infographic. because this is the root of the bleeding.
It absolutely is. The energy sector is where the structural foundation of the current 2026 crisis truly lies. Everything else is a symptom of what happened here.
Let's lay out the groundwork. Early on, the sources established that Germany is actually quite poor in raw materials.
Surprisingly poor, yes.
They have vast forests for timber, they have salt, they have potash, which they're actually the world's 5th largest producer of, used heavily in fertilizers, and they have lignite, which is a highly polluting brown coal. But when it comes to the lifeblood of modern industry, oil and natural gas, they have practically nothing. They have to import almost everything.
Right. And recognizing this vulnerability and driven by a very strong domestic environmental movement, Germany embarked on what they call the energy transition.
It's the big green pivot.
This was a monumental, historic commitment to become the world's first major industrialized renewable energy economy.
And the infographic in my head shows a massive triumphant green spike right here. The data shows that by 2019, 46% of all the electricity consumed in Germany was produced from renewable sources.
36%.
That is an incredible achievement for a heavy manufacturing nation. They have the largest solar power capacity and the 3rd largest wind power capacity installed in the entire world. And simultaneously, they made a highly controversial, politically driven decision to completely phase out nuclear power.
Yes, a very contentious move.
They followed through on it, shutting down their last 3 remaining nuclear plants in April 2023.
But here is where we have to look very closely at the mechanics of the power grid. Solar and wind are intermittent. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. But a massive chemical plant owned by BASF or a middle-stand glass manufacturer needs massive, uninterrupted baseload power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can't just stop production because it's cloudy.
So how are they bridging the gap between their intermittent renewable capacity and their massive constant industrial energy needs?
They were relying heavily on fossil fuels, specifically cheap natural gas.
And here's the catastrophe. Prior to 2022, Germany imported a staggering 55% of its natural gas from one single source, Russia.
55% from one country.
Then comes the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The geopolitical order fractures and the Russian gas pipelines are essentially shut off.
The sudden, violent withdrawal of that cheap energy source from Western markets caused a massive, systemic economic disruption. Energy prices didn't just rise, they soared astronomically across Europe, hitting Germany's industrial core the absolute hardest.
The data paints a brutal picture. By the winter of 2022, which is exactly when energy demand peaks for heating, overall inflation in Germany hit 8.6%.
And that 8.6% is just the consumer average. For energy-intensive German industries, the costs multiplied several times over.
So the factories were paying way, way more.
Economy Minister Habeck had to step up and deliver a very sobering, paradigm-shifting warning to the country. He stated that the planned, permanent end of Russian energy imports will permanently raise energy prices for German industry and consumers.
Permanently.
The decades-long era of cheap energy that fueled the export engine is over.
It sounds to me like they spent decades and an absolute fortune in political capital and engineering to build the world's most beautiful, state-of-the-art, green, solar-paneled roof on their economic house.
Okay, I like this analogy.
But they completely ignored the fact that they were renting the actual foundation of the house from a highly volatile, adversarial landlord. And when the landlord suddenly evicted them and pulled the foundation out, the whole house started shaking.
That is a very accurate way to describe the mechanical failure. It is the brutal collision of idealistic, long-term green policies with immediate, unforgiving geopolitical realities. Germany is learning in real time what happens when an energy-intensive industrial sector loses the core input that made it globally competitive.
They just can't compete.
You can have the best engineers in the world, but if your factory costs 3 times as much to power as a factory in the US or China, you cannot compete on the global market. They are being forced to adapt at breakneck speed, which is exactly why, in early 2026, Chancellor Merz and Vice Chancellor Lars Klingbeil announced the beginning of massive, large-scale stimulus spending directed specifically at reinforcing infrastructure and defense.
They're trying to build a new foundation while the house is still occupied.
Exactly.
But even with all this turmoil, Chancellor Scholz reiterated at the COP28 summit that they are not backing down on the green roof. He stated their absolute commitment to be completely climate neutral by 2045.
Sticking to their guns.
He said, the technologies are there. Wind power, photovoltaics, electric motors, green hydrogen. But, I mean, getting from today's energy crisis to a climate-neutral 2045 without the bridge of cheap gas seems
Oh.
like navigating a minefield blindfolded.
It is an unprecedented industrial transition. No nation of this size and industrial density has ever attempted it. And to really understand how this stress test is physically playing out on the ground, who is winning and who is losing, we have to look at the economic geography of the country itself.
Let's do that. Let's pull out a regional heat map.
Right.
So picture a map of Germany, color-coded by economic output, wealth, and employment. What strikes me immediately, especially compared to other European nations, is how dotted and scattered the wealth is.
It's very dispersed.
Right. If you look at France, you have this giant, glowing, red-hot economic sun called Paris, which acts as a massive magnet, pulling all the capital, corporate headquarters, and young talent into one single center. London does the same thing for the UK, but Germany isn't like that at all.
No, the German economic model is proudly structurally polycentric. It specifically lacks a single dominating economic center. The wealth, the industry, and the political power are distributed across multiple powerful regional hubs.
So on our mental map, we see Frankfurt glowing brightly as the financial center. It's the home of the European Central Bank and the major financial institutions.
Right.
Then you look down south to Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, to cities like Munich and Stuttgart. These areas are absolute powerhouses of high-tech engineering and automotive manufacturing. This is where you find the headquarters of BMW, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche.
The car capital.
Exactly. And the data shows the unemployment rate down in those southern hubs is incredibly low, hovering around a mere 3%.
Which is basically full employment. Then you move your eyes to the west, to the Ruhr area in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. Historically, this was the absolute heartland of the coal and iron industrialization we talked about earlier.
The old engine.
Today, it remains a massive commercial hub, housing 27 of the country's 100 largest companies. But because its economy is still more heavily reliant on traditional heavy industry and natural resources, it has faced much higher unemployment rates and painful structural transitions compared to the high-tech South.
And then there's the ultimate anomaly on the map, Wolfsburg, in the northern state of Lower Saxony.
Oh, Wolfsburg.
Thanks entirely to being the colossal headquarters and primary manufacturing base of the Volkswagen Group, Wolfsburg boasts the highest per capita GDP in the entire country, sitting at a staggering $128,000 per person.
It's incredible.
One single company elevating an entire city to the top of the wealth charts.
But having all these distinct, powerful hubs spread across the map only works if they are seamlessly integrated. What makes this polycentric system function as a single national engine is the physical and financial infrastructure connecting it.
Let's talk about the physical connections,
Yeah.
the silver threads running across our map.
You have the legendary Autobahn network, the massive highway system, which famously lacks speed limits on many stretches, allowing for incredibly rapid transit of goods and business travel.
And the trains.
Yes, paralleling that, you have the Intercity Express, the ICE high-speed rail network, with trains running at speeds up to 320 kilometers per hour, connecting these major hubs in a matter of hours. But the decentralization isn't just physical, it extends deep into the financial plumbing of the country.
This is a crucial point from the sources. When we think of banking, we think of massive, centralized Wall Street-style institutions. And Germany has those giant private commercial banks like Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank. But they don't dominate the domestic landscape the way you'd expect.
Not at all.
Instead, you have this massive, decentralized network of public savings banks.
You are referring to the Sparkassen. This is a uniquely German institution. There are nearly 400 Sparkassen and cooperative credit banks spread across every region of the country, and their impact is staggering. 75% of all retail customer deposits in Germany are managed by these local, community-based savings banks rather than the giant international commercial banks.
75%. So why does that matter? Why is it better for a small-town middle-stand factory to get a loan from their local Sparkasse rather than Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt?
It comes back to the core philosophy of the Mittelstand. A massive international bank in Frankfurt is looking at global risk models, quarterly returns, and complex derivatives. They might view a loan to a small, specialized valve manufacturer in a rural village as too risky or too small to bother with.
They just wouldn't care.
Right. But the local Sparkasse is mandated by law to serve the public interest of its specific region. The bank manager knows the factory owner, knows the family, and understands the generational value of the business to the local town.
So they have a totally different perspective on risk.
They provide the patient, long-term, stable capital that allows the middle stand to survive and innovate without the pressure of global financial speculation.
It really is an intricate mosaic.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, does this intense decentralization make them more resilient, or does it make them harder to steer during a massive crisis?
That's the big question.
If you are the chancellor and you suddenly need to pivot the entire national economy away from Russian gas and toward a completely new industrial paradigm, wouldn't it be easier if everything was centralized in one city under one command structure?
That is the exact debate happening in German economic circles right now. The polycentric nature distributes wealth beautifully during times of prosperity. It prevents the hollowing out of the rural countryside and the extreme regional inequality you often see in highly centralized nations.
So it's fair.
Yes, but during an acute systemic crisis, it profoundly fragments the response. You're dealing with 16 different states, the Bundesländer, each with vastly different economic foundations, different energy needs, and different local political priorities. Getting them all to row in the exact same direction at the exact same time is politically exhausting.
Like herding cats.
Exactly. And nowhere is that fragmentation and the difficulty of national integration more painfully visible than the lingering geographic divide between East and West.
If we look back at our heat map, it is glaring. The sources confirm that despite $80 billion a year in financial transfers since reunification in 1990, the standard of living, the annual income, and the overall accumulated wealth remain significantly higher in the Western states.
It is a sobering reality check on the limits of state power. It proves that even with the immense financial might of the German state, erasing decades of deep, systemic economic division and infrastructure decay is incredibly difficult.
Money can't fix everything overnight.
Capital, high-value industries, and young talent naturally cluster, where the infrastructure, the universities, and the historical wealth already exist. The brain drain from east to west following 1990 compounded the issue, leaving parts of the East structurally disadvantaged to this very day.
Okay, we are reaching the final and, frankly, the most sobering chapter of our economic deep dive.
Yeah.
We need to peer directly into the red data, the deep structural societal challenges that are threatening the very future of the German economic model.
And we need to be clear here. These are not cyclical economic dips that can be solved simply by designing a slightly better car or exporting more machinery or building a few more wind turbines. These are fundamental generational shifts in the bedrock of the country.
The biggest, brightest blinking red light on the dashboard right now is demographics. Germany has one of the lowest birth rates in the developed world.
It's a huge problem.
The population is aging rapidly, which means the active workforce is physically shrinking. Let's think about the mechanics of this. When you have a shrinking workforce, you have fewer young people paying income taxes into the system to support a rapidly growing population of retirees drawing pensions out of the system.
And remember the scale of what we are talking about. The German social security system, that Bismarckian safety net we discussed earlier, comprises roughly 25% of their entire GDP.
25%. That is massive.
It is one of the most generous, comprehensive welfare states in the OECD. It covers healthcare, generous unemployment benefits, and robust pensions. A shrinking workforce puts a massive, mathematical, and perhaps unsustainable strain on the very foundation of that system.
The government numbers are stark. Economy Minister Habeck flat out called the shortage of skilled workers the country's most pressing structural problem.
More pressing than energy, more pressing than tariffs.
Exactly. And what's wild is that this demographic cliff is happening even with massive levels of immigration. The data shows net immigration was 663,000 people in 2023.
Which is a huge influx.
It sounds huge, right? But it's actually a sharp drop from the record 1.4 million net immigrants they took in during 2022. They're importing hundreds of thousands of people, and the workforce is still shrinking.
Because integrating hundreds of thousands of immigrants into a highly advanced, highly technical, specialized manufacturing economy takes years of language training and skills certification. You cannot simply take someone who arrives tomorrow and put them on the floor of a middle-stand factory operating precision robotics.
They need training.
Meanwhile, the native workforce is retiring today.
And the strain of this breaking math is already showing up in the poverty statistics. This is the part of the dossier that genuinely shocked me.
It's very grim.
Let's remember the context. We are talking about a country with the second largest gold reserve in the world. Over 3,000 tons of sovereign gold sitting securely in vaults. A country with an incredible legally enshrined social safety net. Yet the sources tell us that 12.5 million Germans are now officially classified as poor.
12.5 million.
That is the highest number since the reunification of the country.
And the most visible, tragic symptom of that poverty homelessness is surging alongside it.
The numbers are devastating. Homelessness hit 678,000 people. That represents a 150% increase in just the 3 years from 2014 to 2017.
A staggering jump.
And the sources note something incredibly frustrating. There isn't even comprehensive, up-to-date federal data being published on the exact current numbers, despite how widespread the visible crisis is becoming. Over 20,000 of those homeless individuals are reported to be children.
It's heartbreaking.
The contrast is just jarring. How do you have the engineering marvel of Volkswagen, a $255 billion trade surplus, and 20,000 homeless children?
It forces us to take a hard, critical look at the underlying math of the German social market economy. The entire model, the generous safety net, the high wages, the social harmony, the subsidized healthcare, it implicitly relies on one crucial thing:
What's that?
constant, robust, world-beating export growth to generate the surplus revenue required to fund it all.
So the sports car has to keep winning every single global race just to pay the massive salaries of the pit crew and keep the garage open.
Exactly. The social contract was, we build the best machines in the world buys them, and we use that immense wealth to ensure a high, secure standard of living for our society.
But what happens when the math breaks down?
That's the crisis. With exports actively threatened by looming U.S. tariffs, with a heavy over-reliance on a slowing Chinese market, and with domestic corporate profits being eaten alive by permanently higher energy costs, the state is being squeezed from both ends.
Less money coming in, more money going out.
The government is forced to spend massively more to shield its citizens and its industries from these external energy shocks, while simultaneously bringing in less tax revenue from a stagnating, zero-growth economy. The money to fund the generous 25% of GDP welfare state has to come from somewhere.
And layering over all of this economic and demographic anxiety is the inescapable physical reality of climate change. The sources point out that the Rhineland, that historically heavy industrial, densely populated area we talked about along the river, is highly vulnerable to climate shifts.
Very vulnerable.
We aren't just talking about abstract temperature increases. We are talking about the potential physical destruction of infrastructure from extreme weather events. The sources specifically mention fluctuating groundwater levels and the loss of water for industrial purposes.
Think about the logistics. If the Rhine River water levels drop too low due to drought, the massive transport barges carrying coal, chemicals, and raw materials literally cannot sail.
And if they can't sail,
if the barges can't reach the BASF chemical plant, the plant has to shut down production. It's an existential physical threat to the very geography of their industry.
when you combine the sudden loss of cheap energy, the demographic cliff of a shrinking workforce, the geopolitical threats to the export model, and the very real physical impacts of climate change disrupting logistics, it takes a severe toll on the national psyche. It creates a pervasive sense of insecurity.
The sentiment data backs that psychological toll up completely. The dossier notes that less than a quarter of German people currently expect their living conditions to improve in the coming decades.
Less than 25%.
That is a profound, deeply concerning loss of optimism for a nation that literally rebuilt itself from ashes to engineer the Wirtschaftswunder.
It's the psychology of a nation caught in the painful space between an old model that no longer works and a new model that hasn't fully materialized yet. It is a nation in transition.
That's exactly right.
Okay, let's zoom out and close this massive, vibrant encyclopedia we've been walking through. If we synthesize everything we've looked at today, the gleaming silver of the factories, the ambitious green of the energy transition, the blinking red lights of the demographic and economic warnings, and the solid gold of their historic reserves, we are left with this incredible, defining dual nature of the German economy right now in 2026.
On one hand, you absolutely cannot count them out. It remains an absolute global titan. It is still a masterclass in precision engineering. It possesses a highly educated and deeply skilled workforce. It is acting as a brave, first-mover pioneer in the incredibly difficult green technology transition, and it remains the undisputed, indispensable heavyweight anchor of the European continent.
They are still the powerhouse.
They are. But on the exact same canvas, it is navigating the most painful, complex identity crisis in modern memory. The engine is sputtering because it is being forced to violently transition away from the cheap Russian gas that fueled its factories for decades, while simultaneously trying to navigate a fracturing, deglobalizing trade network that threatens the very core of its export-driven model.
And why should you, the listener, care about the intricacies of the German economy? Because Germany is the ultimate canary in the coal mine for the entire industrialized world.
The ultimate test case.
As the world's third largest economy, their success or failure in adapting to this new reality, a world characterized by expensive energy, aging populations, and rising protectionist trade walls, will serve as the ultimate blueprint.
If Germany, with all its wealth and engineering prowess, can successfully transition its heavy industry to a profitable, climate-neutral model, they will write the survival guide for the 21st century.
And if they don't?
Or, conversely, if they fail, they will serve as the ultimate tragic warning for every other advanced economy trying to make the same transition.
It's the ultimate global stress test. Which leaves us with a lingering thought to mull over as we end this deep dive. Let's look back to history one last time. Germany's last great economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder, was built on the absolute ashes of war.
Right.
It was fueled by a unique historical moment, a newly interconnected globalizing world, a rapidly growing workforce, and an absolute abundance of cheap fossil fuels. Now, every single one of those factors is reversing. The era of hyperglobalization is fracturing, the workforce is shrinking, and cheap fossil fuels are a thing of the past.
The playing field has completely changed.
So what will the next German economic model actually look like? When they rewrite the blueprints this time, will the next Wirtschaftswunder be a quiet, highly efficient, high-tech green revolution? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a slow, painful period of permanent deindustrialization for Europe's greatest engine?